The panel where right now is one where we're going to be exploring the challenges of producing a movie. The focus here is less on how you raise the money, how you that's Dave's panel just now, and more on, well, what do you actually do about it? What are the challenges that you face? And I think I'll introduce everybody in a second. I think what I want us to focus on is multiple stages, right? So let's say we've got development, pre-production, and production, and I'll just try and nudge the conversation on through those three stages, and we'll leave off post-production. Some of you know I write the official book on Premiere Pro, and people say fix it in post. I say fix it in pre. You've got to plan for post-production. But I think everybody here would agree that getting a film ready to produce is extraordinarily challenging. I feel somehow it wouldn't be appropriate, but there should be something like a medal or an award for anybody that says that's a wrap on a feature film. It's just an incredible challenge. And we've got amazing panelists here today to talk about their work and about their experiences and share their wisdom. So to your left, we have Jonathan Baker. And I was just asking, yes, a round of applause, please, Jonathan Baker. I was just asking Jonathan how to introduce himself, and his response was, "Oh God." Jonathan's what do they call it? A multi-potentialite, producer, director, writer. You get movies financed. Very, very experienced filmmaker working on properly budgeted feature films. A real wealth of knowledge. We also have Misha. I want to make sure Misha Crosby. Now, Misha Crosby and Jonathan Baker on your right.
John Mawson.
What am I saying? John Mawson. Jonathan Baker. John Mawson. I'm just going to call you Bruce and Bruce, okay? Sorry about that. John Mawson and Misha Crosby are with, did you say DATURA? Or
DATURA.
DATURA Studios. And we'll touch on what you've done in a moment. I won't steal your glory. Steal your thunder. They've worked on many, many types of production in the past and had a brainwave to produce Hollywood level audio production that then, as many of us produce shorts and then go into producing features, they produced powerful, impactful, very high quality, if you like, radio plays, I suppose, that in the old sense of the term.
To an extent, yeah, we branded them as audio movies.
Audio movies, thank you. Sorry, you mentioned that before. Audio movies, which are incredibly impactful and are now looking at going back into media production. So we'll talk about that a bit as well. And we also have the extraordinary Ramfis Myrthil. And Ramfis is here for Ramfis Productions. You can tell from the clues in the name that it's Ramfis's production company. Ramfis has produced a wide range of projects. I don't want to oversimplify, but I suppose there's an LGBTQ leaning for that, and is producing movies that have impact, that convey a message, that expand understanding, expand perspectives, and is a real expert in the field, speaking, teaching, educating, and producing films. Ramfis, in many ways, is the filmmaker I'd like to grow up to be. Ramfis is extraordinarily organized, and I know we'll have a lot to say about development. Okay, so let's get into it. I should mention as well, I'm a director. I've directed 35 shorts, a couple of features, and I have a slate of features, so I'm very opinionated about this, but I want to hear what you guys have to say. So again, we're going to start with development. Let's start. Where's the other microphone? Oh, you got it right there. Let's start with you, John. Is this on? Or
It is.
Yeah. Okay. So once you've got to the point where you have your money, and everybody's nodding and smiling, and they're saying we're going to make this movie, that's kind of at the end of development, right? The development's done. Is there any part of development that remains after that?
Well, I think the movie is always moving in a certain way, evolving in a certain way, so it depends on what you define as development. But development for me ends when you have the cast, you have the schedule, and people start to show up in the office. And that is the pre-production phase. But if we're talking about development and sort of how long that lasts, or is that the question?
Well, sure. Let's say, I mean, my first question was really, after you get the money, is there any development left, or are you now into pre-production?
I think there are two there are two things that come up for me when you ask that question. There are two forms of money. There's development money, and then there's the finance for the actual manufacturing of the movie. So depending on sort of where that goes, I think ultimately development money burns out, and you start to on-ramp with the manufacturing money as you start to crew up and you start to get everybody in the same room, and you're moving around and looking for your shots and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so that kind of makes sense. And I suppose as people come on board, they're going to bring their own nuances to the project, right? So they might influence some of the creative choices that you've already made and remake them.
Correct. Yeah.
You touched on there how much time goes into development before you've locked in the deal.
Yes.
How much time is there an average, or does it vary?
Okay, I have a interesting story about this. I made a movie called The Banker. It's on Apple with Samuel L. Jackson. That was in development for 15 years. It went through 4 different scripts until it came to me. Then we rewrote the script twice, and all of that was development before we shot the movie. And it took 18 years to go from original IP all the way through delivering the movie.
I feel so much better about my career now. That's amazing.
Yeah.
What's the shortest you've ever had?
2 years. 2 years is sort of the studio movie, right. I would say, from concept into script, and then we're in production.
So 2 years is a minimum for you to go from ideation to through development.
For me, I think other people have done it much faster, but I think it depends on the scale of the movie making.
Right. And what kind of budgets are you usually working with, and what's the sort of range for you?
Okay, that all over the place for me?
Or ideally, what's the ideal kind of range?
Well, I don't know. It depends on the story. I've worked at the $300,000 level for some movies, and I've worked in the independent space from 1.5 to 15 million, and then I've worked from 20 to 150 million. So for the studio stuff.
How does the budget correlate to the development cycle? Is there any correlation? Are the smaller budget ones longer development or shorter? Or?
No, I think usually books take a long time. Like if you option a book, you need about 8 years to have a runway to get it into production. I think higher concept movies tend to flip much faster. So the vampire and werewolf movies, like I worked on Underworld, and that was a very fast movie. We found the script, and it was in production within 2 years.
That's fantastic. So, Misha, so how about you? What do you feel about just thinking about development in particular? Mm-hmm. There's this transition from ideation to development. So you got an idea for a concept for a story. Of course, it always comes down to the story.
Right.
But you've got to pick the format, right? You've got to decide how you're going to tell this story. Mm-hmm. And so you both came up with this idea to make audio movies. What was that idea? What was that process where you thought, hey, wait a minute, what if we did this?
Well, it came about, so John had initially written a feature film script that we were planning on, going through development for, attaching talent, going through all the steps we would have gone through in development, but a little thing called COVID-19 came along and changed what
I saw that movie.
Yeah, right? And so it was around the sort of time this radio producer from the BBC had also come across to Los Angeles and said, hey, have you guys thought about doing this as an audio movie? And we were like, what the hell is an audio movie? And he proceeded... So
someone brought the idea to you to do it that way.
Mm-hmm. And he proceeded to say, well, just imagine a high-level feature film with the same production values. Think, full orchestral score, full sound design, maybe putting it in Dolby Atmos with A-list actors. And we were like, okay. And but then it presented this huge problem. What John had written was such a visual piece. It's just, cinema is such a visual medium, and so it had to be redeveloped and rewritten completely for the ear.
So you had a screenplay done. Mm-hmm. You were ready to shoot a movie, and then so how did you?
Well, let me go back to the beginning on that. Is when I first got here in 2011, I wrote and we made a short film that was pretty successful, a 15-minute short film. And
on the Santa Mitria?
No, when I very first.
No, but we're talking about development for this.
I know, but just moving on. But I'm getting there. And actually, that's where Misha came aboard because I cast him. And then I thought, this has been quite successful. I better have a screenplay for a easy to make movie. In case someone says, well, I love your short film, what else you got? So I wrote this incredibly expensive blockbuster World War II movie, which was a passion project as a feature film. It then was looked at by quite a lot of people who said, "Oh, this would make a really good limited season TV series." So I expanded it into that because there was a lot more story to tell that I didn't have time to fit into a feature. I even wrote, even though it's a World War II film story, I set it in space in the future because it's actually rather cheaper to make that kind of a movie in space because you don't have any exteriors, right? It's all interiors.
That's so part
So-
of the design of the narrative was to consider the production elements.
Well, absolutely. And then it was just sort of an exercise. Well, could I make that work? And at that stage, I then met this guy who then came on board as a co-pro, Jago, who read the screenplay and said, "Have you ever thought about doing it, as Misha said, as an audio movie?" And then had to go away and write it for the ear. And with that, I turned it into 11 episodes and went out episode after episode to Misha and other producers for comments and feedback, and then rewrote. And then we had something we could make. And I kind of wanted to make this point because you were asking the question, when do you move from development into pre-production? Well, to me, you can't finish development until you've got a screenplay that is really ready to go. And that's the key. And you see a lot of problems fall over because they're not really that ready. And you think you'll fix it or you'll rewrite during the process or whatever you're going to do. But that was an 11-year process.
So, I want to hear about this idea, Ramfis. So when you're, I find it quite terrifying to think about developing something and moving into pre-production before the project's ready. How often do you find when you're developing a project, do you just wing it? Do you just say we'll get there generally? We're gonna, we know roughly what we want to do, or do you totally lock it down and make sure you've got a blueprint, which you don't have to stick to, but do you make sure it's ready 100%, or do you get it like 80%, 90%, and then think, it'll come out in the rehearsal? Or where are you at with that?
I feel that I do my best to be as organized and prepped ahead of time, but a lot of times there's variables that you cannot expect and change. In terms of working with talent, if something happens with talent, or if someone falls out, or schedule kind of change, or location changes. So I was involved with a movie called A Boy Girl Dream, which was set up to shoot in New York initially, and the financing came from LA. Some of the actors were based in LA, and the project was completely rerouted to shoot in LA. And it was my first feature film where I was boots on the ground, kind of learning as we go. Even though I spent a lot of time in LA, I had not worked with vendors and crew, so I was kind of learning as I went along with the project. And I think a lot of the cast that we initially wanted was prepared to shoot in New York, but everyone had to kind of pivot and make it work. And this film was a one-take movie. So you can imagine, it was clear, it was really one take. And part of
production.
And part of the process was that we had to rehearse multiple times doing this one take movie with the camera team, and it took several takes, as you could imagine, to nail a 90-minute movie in one take. And a lot of things, as you can imagine, had gone wrong.
What was the furthest minute count you got down the movie before somebody messed up at one point?
Just so everyone can hear the question, what was the furthest minute count you got down before it?
Probably a good 40, 50 minutes in, somewhere in there.
79 or something.
Probably like halfway through it, And the thing is that it was a small movie. I mean, we had a decent crew, but we had big stars in it. So, we're doing a take and someone's running, "Hey, Megan," and I'm like, oh man, now we gotta do it all over again and make sure that we have security or PAs that are keeping these people away so that doesn't happen.
So this is a good moment for us to switch into looking at pre-production, right? So, but just to recap, it sounds to me like your point is that even if you're really well organized, which I think most people would agree is important, you might just discover that you have to shoot in a different location, or there's an actor that changes. Has anyone seen Lost in La Mancha, the film about? I'm trying to remember the name of the movie. It's Terry Gilliam.
Terry Gilliam's making of a man from La Mancha that went into.
But it was so they're trying to shoot this movie. It's the Tilting at Windmills narrative, and there's this horrifying video clip of a valley where apparently it had not rained for 25 years, and the shot opens with a river with flight cases floating in the river going downstream, and the poor assistant director saying, "Look, we'll just shoot in a tent. We'll get coverage. We've got to cover some ground." And the producer's saying, "No, we're done. This is it." And poor Terry Gilliam. So there are things that happen that force you to pivot, but ideally you've got it ready to go.
I want to say I was on a movie. I'm not going to say the name of the movie, but we were working on this thing, and one of our actors had a mental breakdown, and she was not taking direction. We ended up having to hospitalize her, and she was one of the leads of the movie. And a good thing we had our writers on set, but we had a big plot hole, and the film was completely rewritten. And this is a 7-figure movie, so there was a lot at stake, major cast, and it still came out. It was not what the writer-director wanted, but it was still a successful movie, and the team was, you could imagine, very stressed about the situation as well. And besides trying to deal with production, we're trying to make sure this person is okay. And there were some complications around that. That person was not mentally well, so at some point they actually turned against the producing team and threatened the film, and became a whole thing. Like, Are we going to be able to get this movie done? How are we going to get this thing done? And somehow we managed to do it. It was a miracle.
So I want to get into production and the inevitable challenges that we face in production in a moment. But but I suppose what you're touching on there also is about the importance of pre-production. And I suppose, retrospective vision is always 20/20, right? You look back and you think it was so clear that was going to be a problem. But you mentioned having enough assistants, enough runners. Jonathan, you've worked on a big range of projects. Do you find that pre-production, that there's a checklist of stuff that you can follow every time, where you can plan ahead for these sorts of issues? Or do you find that every time with pre-production there's something that you missed?
That's a great question. I think every movie is unique. Everyone has its own challenges, and everyone is, not to be discouraging, it's kind of like going to war. You have to have a game plan, and then it always gets changed, and so that's just movie making. And every movie is like that. Every movie, you have a plan. Every movie, the plan changes, and that's what you get used to, and that's it.
That's exciting. So, but accepting that every movie has its unique characteristics, is there any? Are there any checklists you can follow? Like, surely you're going to have to think about catering. You're going to have to think about location scouting. And do you have a system, or do you just approach each one fresh? I'm
going to use military metaphors because my family is a military family, and it reminds me a lot of that. So I think every movie has the same kind of formula in terms of the departments that you need, and that's consistent. And the checklist for me as a producer is making sure that I have the best lieutenants that run those departments. And if I have the best people running those departments, then we can kind of deal with anything as a team. And we will have to deal with anything as a team. But it's really the people, time and time again, that make it good and make it better, make it great. And if there's one weak link, it really can rock the entire project. So it's critical that in pre-production, you're kind of sussing out those individuals. And if you need to, my checklist is if there's a weak link, I need to take care of that immediately. and that might be letting somebody go or beefing up that department or something like that. And then once you get into battle, once you're on the ground, you're just kind of going with the flow. But it's human capital that matters the most in filmmaking.
This is really interesting. So in many ways, Ramfis, you were touching on the discovering, if only you planned this thing a little bit differently, it would have been easier when you got there, especially for such a challenging type of production, a one-shot film. But it sounds like part of pre-production is making sure that you have these backup plans, and the human factor is the most important. Would you say that?
Yeah, that's great. Ramfis has been through something. I've also been through that as well. I think what I'm speaking of, to be clear, is the filmmakers, the people who are literally behind camera. The unfortunate reality, and this is what Ramfis is hinting at, is that once you roll camera on that actor, you are stuck. And it is really hard if something goes wrong with that main talent or that person who has been established. I've been through many instances where that talent has gone in in a surprising direction, and then you're just kind of at sort of this kind of really cumbersome a process for a while until you get through whatever that looks like and then deal with it. I tend to use a lot of metaphors like flying a plane. We are at 30,000 feet. There's nothing to do except land. You can't kick anybody off the plane. You have to put out that fire before we land, and that's how filmmaking tends to feel for me, especially when you've got, problems with talent and there's nothing to be done and you're kind of stuck making the movie that you're stuck making. It's tough.
This just sounds like so much fun. Misha and John, I want to hear about is there a difference for you? You've produced content that's visual first, lots of it.
Sure.
And you've gone through development and pre-production, you've broken down the script, you've worked out all props, locations, and blah, 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 all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. Did you feel that pre-production for an audio movie was dramatically different? Was it easier because you didn't have to think about locations, you got control of the sound? What were the differences for you?
So, in some ways easier, in some ways we learned stuff that we were going to have to put out fires with all over again. Obviously it's less complicated in terms of locations, but with COVID, right, each studio itself had to become a location. We couldn't have any one actor in the same place, more than one at a time. So it meant that every single actor we had 100 different roles, 37 actors playing those different roles, right? For each of the major stars, we had Brian Cox, John Malkovich, Thomas Brody Sangster, and Natalie Emmanuel. For each of those guys, we had a film crew in there filming their performances, and they all had to be done on individual days. And so you schedule the same way you would schedule the locations for their studio setups, and you've got your transportation, you've got your film crew. We had about 3 monitors up. John and myself, we both directed it as well. Looking at the performance, one in the booth for the booth at the other end, and then we've got a Source Connect going at the same time, which is, it's a wonderful tool. It essentially allows you to be on the other side of the world and still hear it coming through your cans as if you're on the other side.
Just for everyone's, what is Source Connect? How would you sum it up?
It's a high fidelity link between the audio feed coming in from a studio mic to the other side of the internet. So it'll sound like we're on the other side of the glass in a recording studio. And it's a constant bit rate as well. So the idea is that you're not going to get any jaggedness with that connection or anything, and you can really hear the intonation of the performance. You're not just getting something that's like a little noisy or anything like that. You're hearing like the texture of the voice, and so important.
So you've worked with tools like that to make it more straightforward, but I suppose because it's new territory, you're having to approach pre-production in a slightly different way. I'm hoping it was cheaper than
it would have been to do a movie, but not super cheap either. It brought up other expenses, and as I said, having every single one of those actors go individually means that you're doing a separate day on each one, right? Yes, we were able to record multiple episodes in a day from one actor, but then when you're thinking about 11 episodes and all those different performances, somebody then has to go and link every single performance up, every single scene. And you've got to make sure that the energy coming out of one actor is the same as the other, right? If all of a sudden you've got a performance that's here and then a performance in here, you're absolutely like not doing good at the other
You're
side.
flipped.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that became about, us, John and I, having a very clear idea in our head before we went in about where a scene needed to be emotionally so that we could give that direction of where they're coming. We learned some stuff along the way as well, which is like if an actor says they don't need a reader, give them one anyway. It was just this thing of the energy changes when there's nobody to bounce off. And even if somebody has a very strong idea in their head, and even if they're an A-lister that the world knows over, you've got to be strong enough to tell them, no, sorry, this is the way it's going to be.
So you have to be ready to direct. You've got to be in control. You mentioned that you set out to film all of these. Why did you film?
So it was just important to have, some visual references along the way, also for cutting the trailer, for cutting promos. I mean, it's interesting to see these performances too. Whilst the episodes themselves, you can go and just listen to them purely audio with, an audio spectrum. I was very, very keen on making sure that we could have those filmed so I could cut into them. I could use that alongside some other B-roll that we generated. We worked with some VFX companies to still recreate that ship and give, an idea of that visual experience alongside.
It's fantastic. So, Ramfis, I'm kind of obsessed now with your one-shot film. And again, I'm guessing that pre-production for that must have been different, because it's got to be front-heavy, right? Every single thing has to be planned and done. What were the lessons that you learned from that process?
Never to shoot a film in a day.
Or got that more than one day, right? That's the measure.
Yeah. You know what? I think we had a really good camera team. We had a great cinematographer. And he brought in, I want to say our producing team had said that we brought the Avengers of filmmaking. So we got the la creme of la creme in every department. So everybody was sharp. They knew exactly what they had to do, where they had to be. The major variables was the general public, because it's a one-take movie. We're shooting in West Hollywood, in Beverly Hills, in the Hollywood Hills, a lot of movement. So it was the outside factors, We were shooting, obviously, exteriors, interiors. We were shooting in a car. So it was a lot of planning, timing, and patience. We had to have people that had patience and understanding what kind of film that we're making, as well as on the talent side, that we're up for the ride. So I think that helped a lot. The biggest variables were just, a car standing in front of you, not moving, and you not being able to beep for sound purposes, or people just trying to fanboy our lead or fangirl our lead, things along that. The interiors were very well controlled. It was mainly the exteriors, like being on the street.
So I want to ask you about the expectation thing, right? So in pre-production, you have expectations of how production is going to go, and we should switch to production when we have time. But you have expectations. Did you find, because it's new territory, doing a full-length one-shot movie, were there things that turned out very differently to your expectation when you actually got into production? Were there things that turned out exactly as you thought they would? Like where was the connection and the disconnect?
So the two leads, so it was basically Amari Hardwick and Megan Good. They had known each other from before, and there was obviously a script, a very strong script. The writer-director, actually Jonathan just had a movie at South by Southwest with that writer called The Dutchman, incredible movie. So I think Qasim, he has such depth to him, and the writing was on the page. But at the same time, Megan and Amari had really good chemistry. So they're able to add in or improvise scenes when things went wrong. It didn't show. It just organically came together. So even though things went wrong, they still worked out, and no one knew but the people that knew the material per se.
So this is kind of something I think you were touching on, Jonathan, that in a way you want to make sure everyone involved is empowered to make decisions in the moment and carry the project forward. And that could be in terms of having lieutenants, I think was the word you used, that you can trust that they're going to make a good decision on the day. But also it comes down to, I mean, sometimes it'll come down to the focus puller, right? Or the camera operator, where they realize, wait a minute, I remember years ago seeing, it was a photographer who did a bunch of photos of Stonehenge, and someone there was a bus going by in the background, and they wanted it to look oldie worldy, and they ended up making it a whole series of photographs with buses in the background, and it went down really well. So this again, it comes down to the human factor, that you have to trust the people, and you have to plan for that in pre-production. And John, I want to hear your thoughts as well on, presumably as you were going through pre-production, and we'll move into production quickly, but as you were going through pre-production, you're working on this, let's call it a screenplay, and making adjustments as you go. Did you find that during the planning stages, during pre-production, it was necessary to make edits, that you discovered there were changes that were necessary, or was it perfect, which offends Allah, you have to be.
Perfect is a tricky thing to get to. When I started to work on and changing it completely from a movie to an audio movie, I assumed that I would need a narrator. I assumed that it would not be possible to.
So you have no narrator in this?
No, right. But as I wrote, and as in an iterative process over and over again, I realized there was a way of not having a narrator. So then you have to work out, how am I going to move from scene to scene and take your audience with you? So the intersections between scenes becomes vital, and then there's a question of using the music, having themes for each major character and for each location. So there's a different theme for London, to being on a ship or being on a U-boat. Soundscape, the difference in how it sounds in London than it does on a ship. So all that had to be done. How do we transition from scene to scene and take the audience with us?
And you would write that into the screenplay, that you'd have, this is the idea, this is the cue, you're going to include
that
this.
That actually came during after the screenplay. Once I'd got it, I had to be careful to make sure that it was clear where we were going in the screenplay. You couldn't just do a jump cut and be somewhere else. There had to be a reason you were going there, and you had to have it to be clear. And then you worked with your sound designers and composer to help you along with that process.
You were very good at changing, and we all worked on it, changing those stage directions to almost like audio stage directions, which were very sound centric, and it helped. It didn't by no means did it go into the level of detail that we went into in post, but it certainly painted the picture audio wise.
I just want to give you all a heads up. In a moment, I want to talk a little bit more about this process in terms of the medium. But before I do, I'm going to ask you for horror stories in production and how you solved it and saved the day. So I'm just warning you now. Have a think about things that you can share. I know we've got thousands. But before we get to that, you guys have produced an audio movie. Have any of you worked on things like virtual reality productions, XR productions, or any other dramatically different media?
No.
Or even if you've produced content for multiple screens, right? Do you find that if you're producing stuff for TV, for example, like episodic content, versus a feature film, does that dramatically impact your pre-production process, or is it essentially the same because you're producing media? Does it change anything?
I think it will. I think it does, because if you're doing multiple episodes, then there's the question of, okay, maybe do we have to shoot parts of episode 2, 4, and 7 in the same location at the same time, because those are the ones that take place in that location with those people. So yes, of course, and you're talking a much longer period rather than you might normally be for when I say an ordinary movie, which you might only be talking about 3, 4, 5 weeks. So yeah, if you're going to be doing an episode every 2-3 weeks and it's a 10-12 episode series, then yeah, if I'm going to be going to Hawaii and I'm going to be taking these actors, well, I'm going to be doing everything there, but at the same time, what am I doing with my B team back home? So yeah, I would say that's a whole different jigsaw.
But also, I suppose, when you're working on content where there's a dramatic passage of time in the narrative, or no passage of time, but you're shooting, episodes 1, 7, and 10 back to back, it comes back to depending upon your team, like your continuity head, your script supervisor, to make sure, your makeup department, to make sure that what was shot in 5 weeks looks like it was shot the same day, right?
Yeah.
And there's some interesting technologies I've heard about for people capturing lighting setups, for example, so that you can reproduce them. Yeah. So what's the summary then? I suppose what I'm hearing from all of you is that there isn't any standard, right? There's no particular single way that you can approach production. It's a bit like theatre in a way. The show must go on.
I would just throw in here that when you're writing and you're creating it, you have to have in your mind, is this doable? Is this a scene I can shoot without either busting the budget or just asking technical impossibilities?
So that's challenging creatively, isn't it? Because
and how do I tell this in an easier way? How do I tell it in a simpler way? Because simplicity is so often the answer. And you might have some really complicated setup and think, no, actually, an example I can give if you have time is one of the first things I made was a short film. And I had a scene where there was a guy in a hospital bed, a woman in a hospital bed, with the beeps going, and the hero was sitting by the side of the bed, and she dies. But our director, Gerard, when I was shooting this, we got rid of that scene completely, and all you have is the beep, 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 and you never go to that scene. You don't need it. That's all you needed. So it was like, okay, I've just got rid of having to hire a hospital scene, a hospital set, and nurses and equipment. I've just got one sound effect and it does the whole thing. So quite often you can solve those problems in a simplistic way, and you're nodding because quite often there is a way out of it.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant observation. It's one of the best points I've heard. I can tell you, for me, the movie is going to break down into just simple story information, and often that information has you have 10 options on how you can produce that simple piece of information, and that problem solving that you just described is 90% of producing. So well said. That's a great story.
I was just thinking, actually, when you're working on a big budget sci-fi project and the budget gets cut, instead of showing the spaceship, you can just have a character say, "Is that a spaceship? It's enormous and it has turrets and I see guns on the front. What on earth?" Okay, so
I think
we
you
don't.
just solved a major problem.
You're welcome. You're welcome. That's my script consultant fee. So, so let's talk briefly about production. I want to hear. I'll go first, right? I'll share an example, because it's a particular kind of torment being in production. Exactly as you put it earlier, Jonathan. That we're at 30,000 feet. If we've run out of cookies, there are no cookies. And so, I've heard it said that I'm Gen X, and I think a few of us might be, but they say that the war cry of Gen X is, "It is what it is." And I think that's what production supervisors deal with every day. I was working on a shoot, I was directing a short film, and there was a scene where the lead actress, she's slapped, and obviously we did the camera angle fake slap thing, worked perfectly on camera, and when she slapped, she had to scream. Pretty straightforward, you would think. She read the screenplay, she saw that was in it, we even rehearsed it, she's like, okay, fine. But then when we got actually to shooting the shot, she revealed she was not capable of screaming. And then all of us on the set were like, what do you mean? You just make your voice loud. What do you mean you can't scream? And she was saying, yeah, I actually just never learned how to. I don't know how to do that. And so, yeah, that was my face. Christy's doing this fantastic. Like, what? What is this cheese? So in the end, we got a runner. And I often think that runners, production assistants, they should have front of screen credits, because without them, you're just never going to get the film made. And so we had a runner standing next to the microphone, and when we did the slap, and we had someone clap their hands to make. We did on set Foley, and then the production assistant screamed, and you could not tell because you couldn't see her mouth anyway. So of course we're not in the business of accurately representing reality. We're in the business of accurately representing an experience. And so you're presenting that information to the audience, sometimes in creative ways. Who's got a story to tell? You guys must have horror stories.
I have a wild story. It's a long one. So I was producing this movie, and it's about a bisexual male that gets involved in an interracial relationship around the Sandusky trial. So it deals with sexual abuse and trauma. Very heavy film. So the gentleman that wrote this, he never had closure with his abuser, and he had to relive this trauma over and over. The other person that we cast, Sheldon, he had met a few years before that. I think they met on Grindr or something like that, and they stayed in touch, and he really wanted to cast Sheldon. So about a month or so before the shoot, we can't get a hold of Sheldon, and eventually we get a hold of him, and we're like, where have you been? Like, we're getting ready to make this movie. And he's like, well, I've been shot. And we're like, what do you mean you've been shot? We're thinking, like, this is a joke. And he's like, no, I'm in the hospital. I've been shot. And basically what occurred was that he was, I guess, exiting a gay club, and he kissed another man. He was on his way home, and a car pulled over and asked him for directions. And when he turned his head, they literally shot him. And we had a really hard decision to make, because we're going into production. Do we still shoot this film with Sheldon, which we want to do, or do we recast the role? And it was a very difficult decision. What we ended up doing was, working with Sheldon, but he had a bag attached to him while we were filming. So we couldn't film everything because they were intimate scenes. And when we're filming, it was like me and Jeremy, the other producer, we were the therapists, because every day these guys were bawling. He was reliving being shot, and Matt was reliving his abuse. It was a very devastating, set to be on.
Sorry, were you in production when they were shot, or is this leading up to production?
He was shot right before we went into production.
So just before production.
Correct.
Wow. But you achieved that by planning the intimate scenes differently or cutting them, and
we had to shoot the movie
filming
in
it
blocks. We couldn't shoot the movie all the way through, and also, a lot of things went wrong with this movie. It was the movie from hell somehow. We had an actor that had come on. Actually, she's the one that called me to come on. She's a well-known actress. She called me and said, hey, I'm acting and producing this thing. I'd love you to come on. I was in LA with an investor, and I said, hey, you should take a look at this. So I flew to New York, met with the team, and they jumped into production. And I didn't know this part, what I'm about to tell you. So basically, they had asked her to sign an agreement, her contract, and she kept blowing it off, and she said, I'll sign it the day when I get to set. Day of set, she tells the PA the same thing, and by the end of the day, I'll get it to you later. So what ends up happening is that her agent and lawyers come back, and they completely change the agreement. And everyone's like, wait a second, I thought we were friends. I thought we had an agreement here. And she basically handcuffed the movie. So at that point, our co-director is really good friends with Neil Patrick Harris was behind the film, and his husband's in the film, and also really good friends with Colby Smulders. So what ended up happening was that the co-director, Kieran, reached out to Colby, told her what was going on, and she's like, I'll see what I can do. She read the script, and she's not an easy get, by the way. And she read it, fell in love with it, and said, you know what, I'll do this movie, but you have to fly to L.A. and shoot my scenes in L.A. And we're like, if we can get Colby Smulders, this is a no-brainer. So that's what we went ahead and did. So we recasted the role, and of course that actress later came back, apologized, and expected the role back, having no idea that Colby took it, and she was pretty pissed with production. But it was the project where we went through so much. We had lost some funding. I ended up flying to San Francisco because I had A Boy Girl Dream, the film I talked about earlier, was playing at SF Film. I met with the head of grants, and the grants had just closed. They have this thing called the SF Raining Grant. They give about $1 million a year. So I said, oh man, I wish I had applied. It just closed a day or two ago. And because of the relationship I had with Lauren, the head of the grant program, she was able to sneak it through. And about a month later, I find out we're quarterfinalists. And then we end up winning it. We get a piece of funding. We get written into trades. And now everyone's reaching out. Hey, do you guys need money? Like, where were you guys when we needed you? And then we get invited to Tribeca Film Institute, rest in peace. And TFI gave us funding. That's where we found our sales agent, who I've worked with on 3 films now. And then later, COVID happens. Yeah. We're about to premiere in London, and Matt was on the way to the premiere. He was at the airport, getting on the plane, and that's when they decided that everything was shut down, which was a very devastating time for everything that we've gone through, from Selden being shot, Matt reliving this thing, losing this actor, getting the money, and our premiere is smashed. So what ends up happening is the next few months, we get invited to virtual premieres, and we keep turning them down. Our sales agent then tells us, listen, if you continue to keep turning these festivals down, no one's going to take you next year. It's going to be considered an old movie, even though it didn't premiere. You guys have to accept a virtual premiere somewhere. So what we ended up doing is accepting Outfest, which is a big queer festival in LA. They did drive-through experiences, and that went extraordinarily well. We were supposed to play at BFI Flair in London, so because we did not play Flair, we ended up playing LFF, London Film Festival.
Okay, but how did the... So you're talking about distribution now, right? You're talking about presenting the film, but
not even yet.
Changes
I'm not
in
even
production have an impact on that process, because you had to change the cast and everything. Did the legal stuff impact that, or were you locked in? Were you tied up with that, or?
Oh well, we never signed the contract with her, so we were able to get out of that.
Right.
Thank God. But here's the silver lining. This is what occurs. So we get into LFF, where they only took 60 movies that year. 10 of the films were American films, so Nomadland, One Night in Miami, One Night in Miami, and Soul, all films that got Academy Awards, and we're in this incredible lineup. And because of that, everyone starts reaching out. And we end up selling the film North America. We end up selling it in different regions. And Matt sends me a message like, hey, Naomi Watts and Regina King just nominated our film for an Independent Spirit Award for Best Original Screenplay. And the only reason that happened is because Selden got shot, because we rewrote the script to adjust to what happened to him. So even though it was the worst thing that can happen, we go to the Spirit Awards, and it becomes one of my most successful movies.
Okay, we need to wrap up, I know, because we've got another session coming. But that you touched on something so powerful there, because I wanted to ask. I guess we better wind up because we have to let the next thing start. But I wanted to mention what I was going to ask. Is there any way that you can? No, you're right. It is buggered. I wanted to ask, is there any way that you can plan ahead, or is it really just, as you mentioned, Jonathan, that you need to have a lean team, you need to have the tools in place? But it sounds to me that one of the necessary components is that you are, in yourself, ready to jump, make the change, adjust as you need to keep going. And you did that. And the outcome is you win awards and you've made this amazing film. There's so many examples I've heard of feature films where the cast that was wanted wasn't available. Someone else stepped in at the last minute, and they became an iconic character, and it was transformative. So I suppose even when everything breaks, I was on a shoot where the camera literally broke in half, and we gaffer taped the two halves together, and we finished the shoot. Big round of applause, please. Thank you so much. Fantastic insights. Hopefully people will stick around a little bit.